Hey everyone. So I want to talk about Gaza and what's going on now because we now have the text of a new 15-point roadmap for implementing President Trump's Gaza peace plan. The document that is supposed to move us, this new document, this 15-point roadmap, is supposed to move us from phase 1 into phase 2. And I've gone through it line by line, and I've compared it to the original 20-point plan that Israel actually agreed to way back when. And here's what I found. This new document doesn't contradict the 20-point plan in any explicit way. It's much cleverer than that. What it does again and again is it takes something in the original plan that was sequential, meaning Hamas has to do X or X has to happen to Hamas before Israel does Y. And it turns it into something parallel and simultaneous and negotiated on the fly. And it kind of undoes the whole purpose of the original 20-point plan. And once you see that pattern, you can't unsee it. So if you're trying to figure out like, okay, you know something's wrong here and you want to put your finger on it, that's what we're going to go through in this video. We're going to go through a few key points. So here we go. Stick around to the end because that's where the real punchline comes in, and you will have clarity on where we stand when you hear President Trump talking about how we're ready for phase 2 and this is all great and we're moving forward with the 20-point plan. This video will give you clarity on what is true and what is some kind of misdirection play that is happening with pressure on Israel. Okay, so let's hit it. Let's pull this up on the screen. And we will start with point 13 of the original 20-point plan. Okay, so let's pull this up. Here we are. Here's the original 20-point plan. Let's go to point 13. Point 13 states as follows. Hamas and other factions agree to not have any role in the governance of Gaza, directly, indirectly, or in any form. All military, terror, and offensive infrastructure, including tunnels and weapons production facilities, will be destroyed and not rebuilt. There will be a process of demilitarization of Gaza under the supervision of independent monitors, which will include placing weapons permanently beyond use through an agreed process of decommissioning. And then it talks about who's going to help with that. But the point I want to make here is this. Notice the words. It says destroyed, not rebuilt, permanently beyond use. That's what Israel signed onto. Now let's compare that to this new document called the roadmap. That's what we'll call it. Roadmap Article 8. Okay, so Article 8 of the roadmap reads as follows. A process to decommission and store heavy weapons, military production sites, depots of weapons, and tunnels shall begin after completing the remaining commitments under Sharm el-Sheikh Protocol, the entry of the National Committee for the Administration of Gaza, the NCAG, and the deployment of the ISF, the International Stabilization Force. Okay, so what just happened here? Here it says that the weapons are to be decommissioned and stored, not destroyed, stored. And it only begins after the political handover, after this new body, the NCAG, enters Gaza, and after the international force is already deployed. So the sequence is flipped. In the original plan, disarmament was the prerequisite for everything else. And in the roadmap, the political transition happens first, and the disarmament is a process that follows on its own timetable. And I'm not the only one who caught this. Someone who I don't usually quote and I'm not a huge fan of, Itamar Ben-Gvir. Again, I agree with some things on him, but I generally am not a fan. Itamar Ben-Gvir already came out and said exactly what every Israeli should be thinking watching this. If you store weapons instead of destroying them under Palestinian control, meaning you store them under Palestinian control, what's to stop them from being used again? He's actually, Ben-Gvir actually pushed to have them moved out of Gaza to Egypt. It's not this is, look, the plain reading of the word store, right? Store them. They're not being destroyed. There's a Middle East expert, a senior researcher at the Jerusalem Center for Security and Foreign Affairs, really one of the premier think tanks in Israel, named Yoni Ben Menachem. And just a couple days ago, he pointed out that the drafts that are circulating of this roadmap aren't describing the removal of weapons at all. They're describing collecting them. And this is what it kind of says here: storing them, gathering the weapons, and concentrating them at an agreed location inside the Gaza Strip, guarded by the Board of Peace inside Gaza. And then he made the point that really matters. He said the strongest military force in the roughly 30% of the Strip that Hamas still controls is Hamas's own military wing, which means that even if Hamas hands over part of its weapons, at any given moment, it can simply take that storage site back by force. You're not disarming them. You're not disarming Hamas by asking them to put their guns in a room down the hall and hoping that they don't go in and break the door down and take them back. And by the way, Article 9 of the roadmap adds something in that the original 20-point plan never had. It says that, check this out. It says that personal weapons in Gaza shall be subject to the regulations of relevant Palestinian laws administered by the NCAG. So personal weapons in Gaza, and the original plan called for full demilitarization of Gaza. Okay. All right, let's move on to another point. Let's talk about the International Stabilization Force. And let's pull up now clause 15 of the original 20-point plan. And it reads as follows. The United States, actually, before we get to it, let me just say, I think that this is one that might be the most consequential discrepancy here. Okay, here we go. The United States will work with Arab and international partners to develop a temporary international stabilization force to immediately deploy in Gaza. The ISF will train and provide support to vetted Palestinian police forces in Gaza and will consult with Jordan and Egypt, who have extensive experience in this field. This force will be the long-term internal security solution. The ISF will work with Israel and Egypt to help secure border areas, and that means border areas between Gaza and Egypt. That's why it says Israel and Egypt, to help secure border areas, along with newly trained Palestinian police forces. It is critical to prevent munitions from entering Gaza and to facilitate the rapid and secure flow of goods to rebuild and revitalize Gaza. A deconfliction mechanism will be agreed upon by the parties. Okay. Let's read that line again. This force will be the long-term internal security solution. That means that the ISF's job was to be the mechanism, or supposed to be the mechanism, that keeps Gaza secure on the inside. Okay, training the police, working with Israel, it says, and Egypt on the border, actually managing security together. So Israel's written into this sentence. Israel's a partner with the ISF in its mission, and they're maintaining internal security in Gaza. Now let's compare that to Article 12 of the roadmap. Here's Article 12 of the roadmap. Let's jump down. Here we are. The temporary international stabilization force shall be deployed in the Gaza Strip to separate the Israeli forces from the NCAG-controlled areas. The ISF shall not perform any police mission or missions related to the Palestinian Society. Furthermore, it shall monitor compliance by all parties with the ceasefire, train the Palestinian police, secure the protection and delivery of humanitarian assistance and essential supplies into the Gaza Strip, and support the NCAG at its request in any other non-policing mission. What happened here? Look at that. It's supposed to separate the Israeli forces. That's the purpose of the ISF, according to the roadmap. And notice the second sentence. The ISF shall not perform any police mission related to Palestinian society. So here, the ISF went from being the long-term internal security solution, and now it's not the internal security solution anymore. Internal security is handled entirely by a Palestinian police force under the NCAG, a force that Israel has no role in training, vetting, or working with in an ongoing way, because Israel's been moved to the other side of the ISF line, because now the ISF is like UNIFIL, like in between Israel and this Palestinian police force that's on the other side. The ISF's job, according to this document, is to sit between the IDF and the Palestinian police. See what happened there? In the original plan, the ISF was the long-term internal security solution. It worked with Israel to deliver it. In the roadmap, the ISF has been redefined as a wall. Its whole purpose to separate Israel from the Gazan security apparatus that Israel now has nothing to do with. And that's, of course, where all the weapons are stored on the other side. This is not a shrinking of Israel's role here. It's a removal of Israel's role and a buffer force that restrains both sides equally, which means basically that the day there's a terror cell rebuilding in Gaza, the ISF will complicate matters for Israel and exist precisely to stand in the way of Israel doing something about it. It's not going to help Israel do something about it. And remember, this still doesn't answer the question that I've been asking since the beginning of this whole thing, since the 20-point plan came out. And if you've been watching this channel and Israel 365 News channel, you've heard me talk about this forever, that no one has any clue who is actually taking the weapons away from Hamas. The roadmap doesn't answer this question either. And what it's doing in this clause, though, is it's writing Israel out of the internal security picture instead of cooperating with the internal security force, the ISF. Now, that brings up a question that no one wants to answer directly. If the ISF is not the internal security solution anymore, again, it was in the 20-point plan, and now it's not. If it's not, it doesn't play that role, and it's not allowed to have anything to do with policing, then who's actually going to take Hamas's weapons away? So Yoni ben Menachem also talked about this, and I think he said something very astute. He said, what's actually being built right now is a force of thousands of Palestinian Authority police who are being trained in Egypt over several months and being prepared to become the controlling security force inside Gaza. This is not a new neutral technocratic body made up of troops from other friendly nations. That's the ISF, but the ISF's not the police anymore. Originally they were. So originally the ISF was going to be, again, friendly with Israel, working with Israel to maintain security internally. Now there's this new Palestinian police force inside, which is basically the Palestinian Authority 2.0. Coming into Gaza, dressed up under a new name called the NCAG. So instead of being called the Palestinian Authority, it's called the NCAG, but it's the same thing. And he put it in a way I really appreciated because it's a good expression in Hebrew. He said, we went from a nivela to a trefa. These are two Hebrew words that refer to two different types of non-kosher meat that are non-kosher for different reasons. And the point being that you can swap the label, but you haven't made anything kosher. So Hamas ruling Gaza was the problem. Handing Gaza to the Palestinian Authority, whose corruption and incitement and the pay-for-slay policies helped create the conditions for October 7th in the first place. This is not going to solve anything. It's really just dressing up the problem in a new name. Okay, let's go to the third issue, and that is Palestinian statehood. So let's see how Palestinian statehood, let's first take a look at how Palestinian statehood is mentioned in the original 20-point plan. It comes all the way at the end, and the 20-point plan is sequential. When you read the 20-point plan, it's very clear. It's a sequential plan. But look at how it's dealt with. While Gaza redevelopment advances, and when the PA, the Palestinian Authority, reform program is faithfully carried out, the conditions may finally be in place for a credible pathway to Palestinian self-determination and statehood, which we recognize as the aspiration of the Palestinian people. Okay, that's the clause there. Meaning the conditions may finally be in place after redevelopment, after the PA faithfully completes a real reform program that is far down the road and is very conditional. Now look at where Palestinian statehood shows up in this new roadmap. It's not at the end. It's not point 19 of 20 or point 14 of 15 or whatever. It's at the very beginning. It's in principle number 1 of the roadmap. All the way at the beginning, here we are. All parties reaffirmed their commitment to President Trump's comprehensive plan to achieve peace in Gaza. That's the 20-point plan. which constitutes, together with UN Security Council Resolution 2803, the agreed-upon international framework guiding the implementation of this process. Through this process, the parties aim at ending the cycle of destruction, securing the complete Israeli withdrawal of the Gaza Strip, restoring normal life, enabling Palestinian governance, reconstruction, security, recovery, and economic development, rehabilitating damaged sectors, and facilitate launching a credible political path that achieves self-determination and statehood. And that's so interesting. They put it right at the very beginning. It's listed as one of the core aims of the entire process, right up front, alongside reconstruction and security. And then in Article 8, the same article about weapons, it ties the statehood pathway to the completion of the decommissioning process. Check this out. A process to decommission and store heavy weapons, military production sites, depots of weapons, and tunnels shall begin after completing the remaining commitments under the Sharm el-Sheikh Protocol, the entry of the NCAG and the deployment of the ISF. And then, let me find it here. The implementation of this roadmap, including the issue of weapons and other articles of the Comprehensive Peace Plan, shall create appropriate conditions for a credible pathway towards achieving Palestinian self-determination and statehood. So the Palestinian Authority reform requirement, I didn't see that there. I didn't see that in Clause 1. I didn't see it in Clause 8. In Clause 8, the two places in this new roadmap that talk about creating a credible pathway to Palestinian statehood do not mention the reform of the Palestinian Authority, which was mentioned multiple times in the 20-point plan, once there at the end in 19, and once earlier when it says that the Palestinian Authority is not going to be involved until they reform. So that was supposed to be the real gate, and that was what Israel needs in order to feel secure that if we're going to move forward with some sort of Palestinian autonomy or self-determination, we have to know that they've reformed, because they are at this point, the Palestinian Authority is a terrorist entity, and we need them to reform themselves. So now statehood has been moved from a distant conditional aspiration to a structural goal that is not conditioned on any reform whatsoever. That's a massive shift, and whatever. That's a huge discrepancy between these two. Again, everything I'm saying in this video is that there's the original 20-point Trump plan is not this. What's happening now is not what Israel agreed to. And here's confirmation of how central that is, not from Israel, but from Hamas itself. Again, I'm going back to Yoni Ben Menachem's report. It was very interesting. He pointed out that in Hamas's own public statements about this roadmap over the last few days, they explicitly say that the whole plan is conditioned on political process toward the establishment of a Palestinian state. So Hamas is telling you out loud that statehood isn't a distant hope tacked on to the end of this process for good measure. It's the price of admission that they're demanding right now in order to move forward. So if Hamas tells you that, and again, the disarmament of Hamas is the whole purpose of this process. If they're the ones insisting on this clause about statehood, that should tell you everything about this clause. Now, let me give you one more, because I think it might be the most important one in the whole document. Maybe I said that about one of the other ones. All right. Article 3. Article 3. Let's go to Article 3. Article 3 of the 20-point plan. Okay, Article 3. No, I'm sorry. Article 3 of of this document. Sorry. Article 3 states as follows. Progression from one phase to the following one shall be contingent upon the verified completion of the commitments of the previous phase. Okay, so it's sequential. This verification shall be done by the IVC, which is the International Verification Committee or something, which shall also observe any violations by either party through an enhanced monitoring mechanism. Okay, so that's what it says there. It says progression from phase to phase depends on verified compliance. The verification is done by the International Verification Committee. Who sits on it? Who sits on this committee? Well, representatives of the guarantors. Who are the guarantors? Well, according to the people running this process, the guarantors are the US, Egypt, Qatar, Turkey, and the UAE. Qatar and Turkey. Now, I've spent a lot of time over the last 6 months, year, documenting on this channel, on Israel 365, is going in detail, talking about Qatar's financing of Hamas, Turkey's open hosting of Hamas leadership, Erdogan calling Hamas freedom fighters. And now those governments, Qatar and Turkey, are on the committee that decides whether Hamas has complied. I mean, talk about the fox and the hen house, right? Now, before we even get to whether this document is good, there's a more basic question, because I've already showed you how bad it is. But here's the problem. Again, according to Yoni Ben Menachem, here's what he found when he checked. Beyond President Trump's announcement and Mladenov and the official announcement that it's been agreed to, there's no confirmation that Hamas actually signed this agreement. In fact, he says that on Hamas's own channels, and he reads them in Arabic, he checks in on Hamas all the time. On Hamas's own channels, there is no agreement and no confirmation of what Trump said. On the contrary, Hamas is actually saying that if there is an agreement, it will only happen after Israel first announces that it accepted the plan proposed by the mediators. Okay, think about that. Hamas is conditioning its own agreement to this on Israel first committing in public before Hamas has even stated its position. Okay, this is all backwards. According to the 20-point plan, Hamas doesn't even have a say. They're just supposed to be disarmed and removed. Okay, Trump announces the deal. Hamas is now saying, well, we're going to reserve the right to say yes or no, depending on what Israel does. So keep all of this in mind as you watch how confidently this is all being sold to us. And look, you don't even have to take my word for it. Nikolai Mladenov, the international community's head guy, the head of this board of peace, who's supposed to be, the point man on this whole thing, he posted this on X on the day that the roadmap was announced. Here's this post from him. Check this out. I'm just going to read you one line of the post because that's the key. He talks about how wonderful this is, what the agreement says matters, what happens next matters even more, blah, blah, blah. Withdrawal, meaning IDF withdrawal, must move in lockstep with decommissioning, meaning with disarming Hamas. Let me read it again. Withdrawal must move in lockstep with decommissioning. Huh? Not withdrawal after decommissioning. Lockstep, meaning in parallel, meaning simultaneous. What I've been saying throughout this video, that there's a shift in this sequencing that I just walked you through, this is confirmed in his words. Israel already knows what this means in practice. An Israeli official was on I-24 News the other day and said that there will be no withdrawal from the yellow line. There will be no Israeli IDF withdrawal whatsoever before Hamas is genuinely disarmed. So it's good that Israel's staking out that position. And that's of course a direct rejection of what Mladenov just wrote here in this X post. That's, in other words, the sequencing fight. This is I want to let's be smart, okay? As we watch the headlines and as we watch all the statements about this in the coming days, what we're going to watch for is the sequencing issue, okay? Because that's what this. I said at the beginning of the video that it's very crafty because this new framework, this new roadmap doesn't explicitly contradict the 20-point plan, but it functionally contradicts it by changing the sequencing of things. So that's what we're going to watch for. Every one of these changes, decommissioning the weapons instead of destroying them, personal weapons being allowed to remain, the ISF being repositioned as a buffer instead of a partner, the Palestinian Authority not having to reform itself and being brought back in under a different name, the NCAG, statehood being promoted at the front of the agreement instead of being a conditional aspiration at the end of the agreement. Hamas's main patrons, Turkey and Qatar, sitting on the body that verifies, whether everyone's complying. All of these things move this document away from what Israel agreed to in the 20-point plan, not with any explicit contradiction, but with it's death by 1,000 cuts that end up being a completely different plan. And we don't even know if Hamas has actually agreed to anything or is just watching how Israel behaves before it decides its next move. So I've said this from the beginning, and I'm going to say it again. Israel must insist that the 20-point plan that it agreed to way back last fall be implemented exactly as written, in the order it was written, not renegotiated, not clause by clause, That's what Israel must insist on. And that's my take on where we are right now. And let's just, let's pray that our leaders know how to hold their ground and insist. And I think that the Israeli messaging should be to hold up the original 20-point plan and say, this is what we agreed to. All right, thanks for watching. Please like, share, subscribe. Tell others about what we're doing on this channel if you find this helpful. And drop a comment. Let me know what you thought. God bless.